Thank you. Appreciate you guys. I just want all of you to know that what you're about to hear is a simulation. All of you are completely safe. Please don't panic. Simulation, everybody's okay. Pop, 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 pop. Reach underneath your seats. There's an envelope. Now the ratio is supposed to work for a full house. We don't have one. So some of you are going to find envelopes with cards in them. Many of you will not, most of you will not. If you do, please stand up. If you find a card inside your envelope, please stand up. And I'm going to go over the accurate ratios just in case, because I know that there are some cards that don't have people in them. Hi, welcome in. Grab a seat. Underneath your seat is an envelope. Pull it out. See if you've got a card in your envelope. If you do, if this was a full house, we'd have about 16 people standing. That would be the ratio of your survival, the likelihood of your survival if an active shooter were to come into this room right now. That is, if you're seated, you would survive. If you're standing, you did not make it. Those of you with a card in it, remain standing if you have a king or a joker. Yeah? Cool, okay. If you have a king or a joker, that means that you have, as an event planner, you are going to experience an emergency, could be small scale, at your event within the next year, assuming that you plan an event every month. Now, the last card has my initials on it. If you have that, stay standing. If you don't, go ahead and have a seat. Cool. Nobody's standing. That's good. Point is, there's actually no card out there with my initials on it because that is the likelihood ratio of the amount of people that's in this room that you will actually be killed by an active shooter or an act of terrorism at a large-scale event. The fact is, we don't have enough people in here to even represent, even if it was a full house, represent the likelihood of you actually dying or even being injured to an active shooter at an event. I hope that brings you a little bit of comfort because it is a very, very rare experience. That being said, I know that we had a very fun topic upstairs. I say that with very thick sarcasm. This one's going to have a couple of interesting stuff as well. As she introduced me, my name is Mike Gipson. I'm an emergency management specialist. And I've got a couple disclaimers to go over first. First thing is we have emergency exits here. Heads up, the one on the right is locked. Use the door on the left. That one is completely open as well. And if anything else were to occur, like alarms going off, I'll give you instructions on what to do. And that pretty much covers the emergency plan. If somebody comes in here with a gun, just run. Fight and run. I can do an entire briefing on how to survive active shooters. I'm not going to do that now. I'll just cover it briefly. But I am here not to teach you how to survive things, but how to plan events to help your people survive things at your events. Second disclaimer is, unfortunately, I'm not liable for anything that happens at your events. I'm going to give you as much advice as possible, but if anything happens to your events, sorry. Even if you follow everything that I advise, I can't prevent things from happening. That being said, this presentation is absolutely accurate to my knowledge of the time of its creation. Statistics are going to change, and some information might be incorrect because some of it is subjective as well. That goes to the third point, that a lot of this is my recommendations based on my studies and my experiences and my personal opinions. Take all of this with a grain of salt and adjust everything to meet your personal opinions and what you think is more important at the events that you plan. And again, the responsibility for any failed events lies on you guys as event planners. Please take everything that I say as a recommendation. The last disclaimer is a lot like the subject matter upstairs. This presentation is going to show and discuss material that is not necessarily fun to talk about. Subjects are going to include shootings, bombings, drownings, fires, earthquakes, death, and injuries. And the last part I really want to drive home, I've got about 3 or 4 videos in here. These videos will show events in which people die, but it will not show people dying. These are not gory, these are not violent. If the FCC rated my presentation, I assume it'd be a PG-13. But Again, it's still a sore subject for many people, and I want anybody who may have post-traumatic stress disorder to be aware that we'll be seeing things, and I will give you a warning before anything's shown. A little bit about me. I was in the Air Force for 6 years. That's my deployment to Djibouti, Africa. And while I was there, I was an emergency management action controller is the title that we were in. I worked in the command center for United States Forces Japan in a basement with no windows for 12 hours a day, doing a lot of fun stuff like receiving phone calls like, hey, North Korea just launched missiles at you, or hey, a plane's about to land without brakes, or anything. Any emergency that you can imagine. I coordinated the response to. I gathered the information and gave that information to leadership, and we pushed forward with the decisions that leadership made. Like I said, I was located in Tokyo at Yokota Air Base. I was sent there in 2011 in response to the Tohoku earthquake that happened due to this fault line sending a tsunami to this nuclear reactor. So they had to deal with an earthquake, a tsunami, and a nuclear fallout, and they are still dealing with that today. That's one of the many reasons I spent many years there. And these man-made threats and these natural threats, these man-made threats being the nuclear power plants and these natural threats, are coupled with a lot of the political turmoil in the area, China, Russia. We've got a lot of small terrorist groups in the southern Philippines and Malaysia. And of course, the most important one in the area, North Korea, who love to send missiles our way. They would send probably about 2 a year. Kim Jong-il's birthday or funeral day, and one other day, I think the anniversary of the ending of the Korean War, something like that. They'd shoot them off. I think I was there 6 years, and I saw about 11 or 12 missiles launched over our head. And we had to treat it as if it was going to hit us, so we dressed up. And I don't know if you can notice here, I'm actually typing with screwdrivers and pencils because those gloves don't really work on keyboards. But yeah, it was a serious time, and we treated it very, very seriously. That's enough about me. Hopefully you feel like I've got enough credible experience to talk about a little bit what I'm going to be covering here. First, I'm going to go over some important information for you to understand what an emergency and a disaster is and how to plan for it. And that way you can implement the tool that I provided you, which you have all picked up when you sat down, in your emergency plans for your events so that we can help save lives at the things that we create. The first thing that I want to talk about is our definition of an emergency. This is a simplified version, and I'm going to play this video, and this video is going to have a pretty shocking thing happen, and it's not going to be fun. I actually muted the audio because there's a lot of cuss words and a lot of screaming, so it's going to be muted. But an event like this can very easily have unforeseen weather. They even checked the weather before this event. I think this was in Indiana in about 2011 or 12. And anything like this could happen in an event like yours. The stage I'm standing on could collapse. Anything that you think has security has to be quadruple checked. And even then, you can't predict weather. You can't predict, terrorist attacks. And you have to plan for it. So an emergency is something that risks life or property that requires multiple people to respond to. Going up a notch is a disaster. I like to simplify the definition as multiple emergencies. This one does have audio. This is the earthquake at a meeting much like this one. And I want you to notice the facial expressions of the audience members when the earthquake begins. They notice it right now. And watch what half of them do and what the other half do. There's a very split decision on how they respond to this. So now we've got a power outage on our hands. That's an additional emergency that we'd have to handle at our event. Okay. Do you guys notice that half the audience runs for the emergency exits and half of them tries to stay in their seats and buckle down? One of the issues with that is that the person speaking was not prepared for an earthquake, ironically, you're in Tokyo, and was not giving guidance to panic-stricken people. It is a responsibility of people who currently have the attention of their audience to maintain attention of the audience during an emergency and to guide them to safety in case something were to happen. You as event planners have to make sure that people who are up on the stage or any one of you can step forward and help protect the people that are attending your event in case something like this does happen. So you know about emergencies, you know about what a disaster is, and you got an idea of the fact that they can come at any point, unpredictably. How exactly do we go about preparing for these? Well, emergency management has a cycle that we use, and honestly, you can start at any phase of the cycle. Hopefully you won't be starting at the response phase, because at that point you're not prepared, which is why we like to start at the prevention phase. And the prevention phase is summarized as the minimization of the likelihood of an event actually occurring. Anything that we can do to stop something from even starting is I personally think, the most important phase of the emergency management cycle. The second phase is mitigation. If something were to happen, how do we make the effects of that much less? If a truss was going to give out at a stage and it was going to collapse on a crowd, how far back do we have to have the crowd in case something collapses? If this projector were to fall forward, how far back do I need to seat people so that they aren't injured by that? Things like that. So we're going to try to mitigate something bad happening, the effects of something bad happening. Preparedness is actually the enabling of the response. So now that we've thought of things that might likely happen, we've come up with solutions that actually might save people's lives in case something were to happen. Now we have to actually put it into plan. We need to make sure that our fire extinguishers are not expired, the fact that we actually move the seats back, triple check truss and staging for events, things like that. And preparedness, I actually think, is the second most important, because that's when the action phase starts. The first two is really thinking, and you're going to be planning your events in the prevention and mitigation phase. The preparedness phase is the execution of your events. With the moment you start loading in equipment to your events, the moment that you start having people practice their events or hooking up equipment, whatever, that's your preparedness phase. And then the response phase, if something were to happen. Hopefully none of you get to this, but I think that my demonstration in the beginning hopefully got across that some of you are going to see something bad happening. In fact, of the 3 of you that were standing, there should have been 4 of you if all of you were here, 4 of you standing for the likelihood of seeing an emergency happen within the next year. It is like a 0.5% chance, that's 1 out of every 200, being fired for mishandling an event, an emergency event at one of your events. And that's off a number in 2016. A survey was completed, how many people know someone who was let go from their company due to the mishandling of an emergency at one of their personally oversought events. So we got to get that response phase down so that all of you protect your jobs, you protect the equipment, most importantly, the lives of the people that are at your event. The recovery phase I've actually got grayed out, because that is mostly out of your hands as event planners. You're going to have a public relations team or the leadership of your company handle building the reputation of your company back, and you're going to have volunteers all the way through emergency response personnel helping the recovery phase after an emergency happens. So now that we know kind of generally how to respond to emergencies, let's talk about the 2 types of emergencies you're going to see. We're going to see natural disasters, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence and tell you what a natural disaster is, we all know, but has anybody as event planners actually experienced a natural disaster at any of your events? If you guys are trying to think for a second, let me go first. A couple of natural disasters that I saw out in Tokyo. We had 2 large-scale typhoons. We've had many typhoons, actually, but the 2 biggest ones were huge. This one's actually, the diameter is almost the entire island of Japan there, and it was massive. This one, you can see the location that I was at was actually in the eye of the storm for about 45 minutes, and a lot of people were not educated the fact that they were in the eye. Power was out, they couldn't get the information. They thought that the storm was over. They went outside, they started driving, trying to help others, and the second wall was on its way, and a lot of injuries and loss happened because of that. This picture is kind of fun. We actually had a record-setting blizzard in Tokyo in 2014. There was actually so much snow so quickly that it lifted the wheels of the plane off the ground because of the weight in the back. Obviously something that we were not prepared for. We've never had that much snow lift an aircraft off the ground by itself. It's a pretty spectacular thing. Now, I know that these are not at events because I'm not an event planner, but has anybody witnessed a natural disaster or even a small natural emergency at an event of theirs? Sure, go ahead.
A tornado in Nashville when I was holding a meeting at the hotel.
Oh yeah, what did you guys do to try to mitigate the effects of that tornado?
All of our attendees
Cool.
until it passed, and then we went up to the lobby, and the hotel did a great job.
Cool, awesome. Was there an emergency action plan for tornadoes set in place beforehand?
No.
Gotcha. And that's fine. Tornadoes come out of nowhere. I've actually lived about 11 years in Texas and had my fair share of tornadoes come through as well. Tornado's a big one. Has anybody else seen any other natural disasters? Go ahead.
Went through a hurricane in Orlando. It was Charlie.
Oh.
We had a meeting in place, and basically, I referred to my own checklist I had just for what we should do, but I also deferred to the hotel in their execution of where we needed to go, what we needed to do.
Perfect. What I love about both your stories with those is that you consulted outside agencies in the venue that you were at, and I'm actually going to cover that in a moment. Second one that we go over is man-made disasters. A lot of people's minds go immediately to active shooters and bombings because that's kind of what's force-fed down our throats through media nowadays. It's one of the scariest things that we have to endure. But man-made disasters also include hazardous chemical spills, electrical fires, the truss that was falling on the stage in the very beginning. That video was a man-made disaster despite it being caused by the wind. Yeah, so we get an idea of man-made disasters. A couple things that I've seen in my time. On the left is an active shooter exercise at Yokota Air Base. Every single building had to have been memorized by active shooter response personnel. Every nook, every cranny, and it had to be ran almost constantly. We had a lot of North Korean sympathizers. We had a lot of older Japanese people who believed that we should not be in their country. A lot of people who had a lot of aggression towards us. Thankfully, Japan is pretty much a no-guns country. It's very, very, very hard to have a gun in Japan. But we trained for it anyways. And if you'll notice, it's an orange gun there. That guy is safe. That is not an actual photo of something bad happening. The fun one on the right, though, however, is a old World War II bomb that a construction member found with his tractor. He almost detonated it. He dug around it, thankfully, and recognized it. He reported it to us, and we had explosive ordnance come out and detonate it. If you'll notice, it's actually close enough to a Chili's over here that we had on base. And there were, I think it was 1,000-foot cordon and evacuation of those areas, those buildings that we actually had to coordinate. It was an exhaustive 8-hour process just to detonate that, but it was very satisfying. But I guarantee you there are many, many, many more bombs buried in that dirt that we have not yet found. Have any of you experienced a man-made emergency or disaster at any of your events that you've planned or been to, even if you were just attending one? No one? Good. Honestly, that's good. I like the numbers low. I'm glad that none of you have experienced it. Let's keep it that way. As event planners, let's continue to keep that number low, please. Things that you can do as an event planner is start off by doing a risk assessment. This risk assessment will look at the venue, it'll look at the demographics of your audience, it's going to look at the equipment that you're using, it's going to look at the duration of the event, and you're going to check the weather, all of that. You're going to try to see everything that could possibly go wrong at your event. The second thing you're going to do is create an emergency action plan to prepare for anything that could occur. If you look in your pamphlets, actually, there's going to be a chart. I'm going to grab one real quick. There's going to be a chart in there with a couple of examples. It's going to be on the first pre-analysis page at the very bottom. Put every event that you could have, that you could think of. Put alien UFO landing. Everything that you could think of. And then rate it on the likelihood of it happening, rare, moderate, or likely. And think about the degree of response that it's going to warrant, or if your event is going to be completely shut down, or if you can continue if that event or emergency takes place. The emergency action plan starts with the first page there that says prevention that you've opened up. It's on the left-hand side. You can go and open pamphlet all the way up because those are the phases of the emergency response plan, that cycle that we saw earlier. Each one of these panels represents. And your prevention phase is going to be built into your emergency action plan. And you're trying to come up with mitigations and responses and prevention methods for the emergencies that you predicted beforehand. While doing so, you're going to try to develop life-saving measures within your event, and we're going to go over a couple of those in a moment. And then you're going to coordinate with outside agencies. Both of these ladies mentioned that they coordinated with the hotels that they were in. That's something that you absolutely need to do. Feel free to reach out to local police, emergency medical teams, and fire departments as well. Keep that in mind. Let's go over a couple risk assessments real quick. This is a fun one. So we've got our entrances over here. They're going to walk through this way. They're going to check in, walk through this way, have their seat. We've got a podium, 2 projection screens. They can't really see past it, but we have a patio exit back here that if someone were not to mention, they may not see that exit. And that's the point, because we've got an electrical fire and it's spreading to the exits over there now. So people are going to feel like they're trapped, or they're going to try to funnel out these exits on the sides here, which actually brings them closer to the fire that's spreading. If you were able to advertise or design your entire display to advertise the exit that's behind the podium, you could potentially save lives from a fire. If you analyze your entire hazard vulnerability analysis, the list of threats that could happen at your event, you're going to look at this map and reevaluate it and work on your load-in every single time that you look at a new emergency that could take place. Another one, it's a bigger venue now, lots of stairs. We're at, I guess, like a craft fair or something. We got a lot of craft fairs with booths, vendors and stuff. We've got an active shooter that comes in. And one thing about active shooters is that with a gun, they've got pretty much like paths that they could shoot down, these paths here. And when you develop the floor plan with a bunch of booths like that, you can actually use those booths as a method of cover for potential victims. You can route them towards exits, and you can create hiding places for people that are attending your event for potential active shooters. If you're at a politically charged event, Planned Parenthood's a controversial one, or if you're at National Rifle Association event or something, anything that's controversial, and you've got somebody that comes in that wants to hurt people, if you develop your floor plan in a way that actually prevents them from being able to shoot down aisles like this or keep their eyes on exits, you can actually save lives. So with that fire, we've got, it actually was a man-made disaster. This fire was actually man-made, but you can treat it as a natural disaster because it's going to spread wildly. And then we looked at a man-made threat at your events as well. So let's say we've looked at everything. We've looked at all of our risks and we've assessed them. Let me get through this little animation again. Now, we're going to start developing our emergency action plan. When you develop your emergency action plan, you need to know who is in charge until the authorities arrive. Police might not be on scene already. Emergency medical teams may not be on scene already. So one of you or one of your staff members are essentially going to need to take charge and respond to that emergency as a leader. Your load-in, your show, and your loadouts may change based on how you prevent or mitigate these events. Have contacts for emergencies that are not just 911. Make sure you know how to contact the hotel lead. Make sure you know how to talk to the security team within this, convention center. Also, if you really have a large-scale event, 100,000 people, maybe a large concert or something, have hazardous chemical waste response teams on your emergency action plan. I mean, it really couldn't hurt to have all of Portland's emergency response teams, or whatever city you're going to, ready on that contact sheet. And then also plan in a way that protects your gear. We talk a lot about protecting lives, but save money for your company and save your reputation for your company as well. Continuing with life-saving measures, you want to give a safety brief, much like we did upstairs. It was great. Did one down here. Saw the emergency exits. There's an emergency medical personnel right around the corner near the restrooms, all of that stuff. Arm your staff with skills. Let them know, give them CPR training. Just start with that. Give them first aid and CPR training. Teach them to recognize threats. A fun one that I wanted to set up for you actually is in the back of the room here, there's a backpack and there are cables sticking out of it. I did my best to actually make it look like the backpacks that were used in the Boston bombing. If any of you noticed that and didn't say anything about it or even didn't think twice about it, it's good to just be cognizant of unattended bags in your venues. It's a very unlikely threat, but still be cognizant of it just to keep yourself and everybody else around you safe. Provide your audio engineer a pre-recorded emergency sound clip. This is a cool one too. You've got AV techs upstairs and they've got control of all the speakers, got microphones here. Give them a big red button to hammer fist on and it automatically starts looping audio that says, this is an emergency, please proceed to the exits, and it just keeps looping it. Just have that ready. You can even have the lighting engineer program emergency lighting preset. A single button, they don't have to mess with faders, they don't have to turn anything off or on, it's literally a single button where they can program all of their lights to highlight the emergency exits, to bring up the house lights, help people escape as quickly as possible. Also, make sure that when you're developing your floor plan that you're not blocking defibrillators, exits, landline phones, and emergency lights. I want to highlight landline phones mostly because when an earthquake happens or large-scale event of any kind, your cell phone's not going to work. There's going to be so much signal jamming those satellites or poles, you know what I'm trying to say. Thank you, towers. They're going to be jammed so long, hours and hours. I think it was almost about 2 or 3 weeks that many people in Japan had to wait before their cell phones were able to reach family members and let them know that they're alive. So please don't block any phones with any of your equipment if you can try to do so. Continuing, run your cables high and out of reach. We've got some gaffed cabling here. We've got some cables run up here. Everything else looks fine as far as cables go in this room. We've got another one over there actually. But it's not so much just a tripping hazard on day-to-day events that we're worried about. We're worried about large-scale mass evacuations. Everybody gets up and runs for the exit as quickly as they can. If a single person trips, it's not a broken wrist, it's not a hurt hip. It's many people tripping and more people dying. So please run the cables out of the way of the emergency exits, and if you can, run them up high. Do a stress test prior to the show. Crank up the volume and make your equipment get hot before anybody comes in that room. Make sure that all the cables don't have frayed parts, that nothing's sticking out, no electrical fires can start. Just really, really stress your equipment, possibly back in your warehouse or whatever, before bringing it to the venue. But just do it before your attendees show up. Create exit trails. Make the routes to the exits visible and don't block those signs, please. If you've got high drapes or whatnot, make sure that at any point, even if it's not the closest one to me, I can still see an exit sign anywhere I'm standing on your floor. Inform the audience of expectations. If we're going to have a light show or a movie or something that might induce seizures, let them know. Pyrotechnics for those of us with PTSD. Loud sounds, same thing. Hazardous chemicals, please don't knock them over. And cable runs, like I said, we couldn't run this one high, so please, if we're exiting, watch the cable run low in front of the door. That's just a hypothetical example. Notifying outside agencies is an interesting one. This one should be done way in the prevention and preparation phase. Contact everybody and have a folder ready of floor plans and contact sheets of everybody that you work with. Having that ready, if an emergency happens and the fire chief comes in and he says, I need to know who's here, where they're at, and where the fire's at. You've got a map ready for them, because they're used to it being a blank floor. That's what they think a convention center is or a hotel center is. But if you've set up vendor booths or if you set up light trees or displays, podiums and stuff like that, you've got it mapped out and they know what's going to be in their way if they're walking through smoke and fire. Have an event staff contact sheet ready. Again, everybody needs to be contacted, and I'm going to go over a little bit of a detail on that. I'll do it right now, actually. The staff security measures on the prevention page create a little chain of contacts here so that each staff member knows who to report to during an emergency, and the event lead can collect accountability from each of their event leads. Instead of me having to count 100 people, I can have 5 people come up to me and tell me that their teams have all been accounted for or who's missing. I'll go over that a little bit more. There's a really clever way to do that, and I'll go over that in a second. And then inform the agencies that might be responding of the potential risks. That goes along with the floor plans and the maps, but if you tell them, hey, we've got loud noises, or there might be a video that shows gunshots, or like that audio might show gunshots, and they're trying to, it would be very unlikely that they're trying to respond to an active shooter at a place where you're playing gunshot audio. But if you were ever having anything that would muffle the sound of a threat, let them know. Some tips that you should do when you're planning this is to know your venue. Has a disaster ever happened to the location before? If you're going down to New Orleans and they had to house a lot of people there for Hurricane Katrina, you got to know about that. If that building has been rebuilt due to a fire, you should know about that. If you wanted to kill someone, how would you do it? Now, how would you go about stopping that person? Get in the mind of the threat. Think about right here in this room, if you wanted to come in one of these doors, which door could you take most lives? Prevent them from doing that in your event planning. How old is the location? What is the elevation? Are we high enough for snow? Are we low enough for a flood? What is the material made of? Are these walls flammable? Are they filled with asbestos if anything were to collapse? Are security cameras used? If anybody does come in, am I blocking security cameras? Am I creating an unsafe environment by even having this in a location without security cameras in the first place? And then what are the weather patterns in my area? A lot of you are international event planners and meeting creators. If you're going to go down to Florida, it's very different from Oregon. If you're going to go to Vancouver, Washington, it's very different from Oregon. There are very subtle differences regarding everywhere that you go. Continuing the tips. Looks like this thing wanted to just turn off on me. Make sure you know your audience. Know the local concealed carry laws. If somebody's walking in and they've got a gun on their hip, make sure you know if it's legal in that area not to overreact and respond in a way that will cause conflict. Or if it's illegal in your area, respond accordingly. Make sure he's not a threat. Understand the panic and groupthink mentality. If a single person, if there was somebody right there that got up, started screaming and ran out the door, all of you will immediately panic. All of you will immediately ask, what's wrong? What do I need to do to save my life? And you will probably go out the exact same exit they went out. But that person probably didn't make the best decision. So you need to know your environment. You need to know that people in your audience are going to panic and they're going to have groupthink. You need to know if you're covering controversial topics. Are there any potentials for protests going on outside of your event? Or rioting on the inside of your event? No special needs. Obviously, wheelchairs and disabilities, but also non-visible ones like PTSD. Allergies. If you've got a dog show, make sure if anybody's got, just so happens to discover that they've got a dog allergy there, that you've got medical staff personnel that can respond to it accordingly. As well as epilepsy if you've got a lot of video or a lot of lighting. Design your patrons' needs over the client's desires. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. If you have an emergency that happens at your event and someone wants to sue you, you're going to lose all that money. So please protect yourself by designing in a way that protects the audience. Some things that you ought to know is that people tend to use the same exit as others during panic. I kind of covered that in a second. If something caused someone to run out of that emergency exit because they heard gunshots, and just so happens that the shooter's right outside that door, many people in the audience are going to stand up and run out the same door towards the threat, simply because they watched someone else go out that exit. By educating your audience by saying, we have 2 emergency exits here, we have 1 here and 1 here, you know which one's closer to you, and you can make a decision during your threat yourself. You're arming your audience with information. Also, an interesting solution to this that is still being researched, but I'm going to show you a little video, is that strategically placed obstructions actually increase the exit efficiency. It's a weird thing. Let me show you this. So a lot of studies for emergency exit evacuations. There's a lot of algorithms and computer simulations and whatnot. This is one of them. But they look at the rate at which people can exit based on how wide exits are, how quickly the doors open, and things like that. And I won't bore you with statistics, but an interesting thing is they put ants in a little petri dish here, and they put a pheromone that scares them or makes them want to leave as quickly as possible. And they timed the rate of how many ants that would exit out a little exit over here without an obstruction. Then they put a little cylindrical obstruction in front of it and found that it decreased stampeding and actually routed ants out of that exit. So they actually tried it with people. They put concrete columns about 4 to 10 feet in front of emergency exits and had people safely rush out, and realized that that convex shape actually folds people in line out an emergency exit a lot quicker than if it wasn't there at all. Now, that being said, don't go obstructing emergency exits thinking that you can have people exit a lot quicker. This is still being researched, but just be aware that there are still studies that could make your event planning safer. So keep researching. Keep your finger on the pulse of things that affect your events. And stay up to date, because if 5 years, now every emergency exit has some sort of cylindrical obstruction and yours doesn't, maybe you might get in trouble for that. I don't know. Just stay aware of it. Another thing you ought to know, active shooters could use house lighting to better ID targets. So we talked earlier about lighting up emergency exits and bringing up the emergency house lights if an active shooter comes in. Ironically, sometimes bringing up house lights is not the best thing to do if an active shooter comes in. You don't want targets to be too visible. It's still being researched as well. You could have your lighting technicians move all moving lights towards the exits while keeping house lights dim. That might blind the active shooter as he comes in the exits and lets emergency attendees find the emergency exits quicker. Think about that while you're developing everything in your events. Another thing you ought to know, audience members rarely ID gunshots by sound alone. Outside, you heard a couple of claps. I used wood planks actually for that. Don't have any blanks or anything that I was firing off inside a convention center. But those wooden planks actually sound more accurate to gunshots than what you think. There's less bass. It's more of just really a clap. It's a little scary, actually. Even if any of you have gone and fired a weapon yourself, it sounds completely different in your hand or in front of you in the same room than it does down the hall. A lot of people are very, very blind to the threats of an active shooter. And I want to show this video here. This is of the Las Vegas shooting last year or the year before. Again, you're not going to see anybody get hurt. You are going to hear gunshots and you're going to hear screaming. If anybody feels uncomfortable, feel free to step out. But what I want you to pay attention to is the dialogue that's in captions at the bottom of the video. And try to place yourself there and think the same thing. Now remember, you're going into this knowing you're about to hear gunshots. They don't. They're at a concert. She says, relax, it's okay.
Relax, it's okay.
Still asking questions, not really sure what happened. Okay, you think at this point, they know it's a threat, right? At this point, they're getting shot at, right? It's okay, relax. It's the PA system. It's just the sound system. It's an electrical fault. Something's wrong with the sound system. More. Now they're starting to realize that something's wrong. There's a lot more to that video, but we don't need to go on. The point that I'm trying to make is that this is Las Vegas. They're pretty lenient with their gun laws there, and a lot of people have fired weapons, and most people would recognize that that's a gun that's shooting at them, not the PA system. They heard it 2 or 3 times, and still confidently we're saying, well, maybe not confidently, but we're saying that it's the PA system. They weren't evacuating, they weren't getting out of there. And I guarantee you that it wasn't just those 2 girls that thought that. There's an entire crowd out there that was thinking that, and that's what led to 55, 56 deaths during this event. Another thing that you ought to know, controversial subjects can incite violence. Ironic solutions to this, and I'm intentionally trying to give you some counterintuitive solutions just because you can research normal solutions on your own. Decorate using mirrors, blue lights, and use ambient music. Mirrors actually, if you notice, go to a bar, and behind a lot of the alcohol that you see are large mirrors. That's not just for decoration to make the place look bigger. It's because people who see themselves in a mirror actually act less aggressive. It's a weird psychological tool. So if you've got a controversial topic at your place, decorate with mirrors. Have people see themselves a lot, and they're going to respond to others and other controversial topics with a lot less aggression. Same with using blue lights. There's an entire street actually in Japan that replaced their street lights with blue light. And it has actually drastically dropped the amount of crime in that area instead of using the orange and yellow lights that we use in America. And I think that's starting to spread now. So blue lights actually decrease the amount of aggression in people as well. And also using ambient music. Having background music at an event will keep people a lot calmer. Let's do it again. Another thing you ought to know. Yeah, everybody knows this one.
Yep.
Well, I'm not going to, beat a dead horse. Everybody knows about this one. If you don't, we sit on a very large subduction zone. It is this orange line over here, 30 to 60 miles off the coast of Oregon, maybe a little further. That's the big fault. That's the big one that's going to come our way. That's the one that most of the geographers have their sensors on. But the interesting thing that you might not know is that Portland itself, here's the Willamette, here's the Columbia River. You can recognize some streets, I-5, 405. These are actually small, shallow end faults. Portland itself sits on 3 faults. So when that one goes, these will go too. And when those go, Mount Hood will erupt again because it's overdue as well. So plan for that. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen at one of your events. Yeah. The very last thing that I want to cover as far as you ought to know, is my last active shooter topic related thing. When you develop your interior, there are two different things there's a very different thing between cover and concealment. The one on the left offers you cover. It actually stops the bullets. If you are ever being shot at, that's what you want to find. They can't see you and the bullets can't hit you. If you can't find that, or if you can't provide that at your event as an event planner, use cover. Put a lot of cover up. Provide a lot of hiding places for people who need to run for their lives. This is not going to stop a bullet, but it'll make it a lot harder for you to get hit. And that's the last thing that I've got for you. Are there any questions for me? And I've created a list underneath here that I can go further into or give any presentations on in the future. If you would like to hear more, please let me know. Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering if, I know that there was a lot of controversy around Jason Aldean not saying anything during the concert when they started shooting. Do you think if he had announced what was happening, that lives could have been saved?
It's interesting to put a lot of responsibility on the performer, a lot of responsibility on the speaker. We've got speakers upstairs that probably have nothing to do with emergency management, and yet it's their responsibility to help you evacuate, right? As an event planner, you can do what little you can to prep them as speakers to help the audience before they leave. Give them a quick little speech and say, hey, if we have an emergency, please tell them to leave with you, or please, whatever you want to tell them, whatever your event says. As far as the controversy of him not doing more, it's unfortunate that it's just on performers, because there's an entire lighting team, there's an entire audio team. Like I said, they could have hit a button and said, this is an emergency, evacuate. There's an entire security team at places like that. And who knows what they were doing at the time. I really don't know if they were helping evacuate or if they were standing, still checking tickets or something. I don't have an answer as far as the controversy goes, but as event planners, do what you can to mitigate it. Keep that in mind when you make your next event. Thank you. That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we actually, with our organization, do that. And
cool.
Even when we hire celebrity speakers, we have ex-presidents, and we had, for example, Justin Trudeau from Canada as one of our speakers. We have our point person working with him, and we went through that very exercise. If anything goes on in the room, our point person is in the first row. They jump up next to him and instruct people. We don't expect Trudeau. We're not going to tell Prime Minister Trudeau to do certain things.
Right.
So there's our staff.
Ironically, one of the most exhaustive things that we had to prepare for in the Air Force was distinguished visitor incoming, presidential visits and things like that. It took so many man hours and so much preparation time because they're an asset as well. I guarantee you that at that Las Vegas shooting, if Justin Trudeau or if any performer had been shot, it would have received even more negative press, and the event planners would have received even worse of a reputation. So by having your security team be able to protect the performers or the distinguished guests as well, it might actually save the reputation of your company as an event planner in the first place. But that being said, I still feel, personally, this is my personal opinion, Justin Trudeau or any president or any important speaker should still have the ability to say, it's time to go. They shouldn't just duck and run to protect themselves. I feel like regardless of your stature or your authority figure, you have a little bit of responsibility by standing in front of a group of people who you have their attention and providing them safety instructions whenever something bad happens. So, and that's on them. But then again, I mean, if we're talking about the president and he's saying, come on guys, let's evacuate, and he gets shot, the country's gonna be in a bad place. So yeah, it all depends on who you've got speaking. Go ahead.
So like oftentimes in our situation, we're producing like a smaller part of a larger event.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't in a position to have a safety plan for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still advise having like an evacuation safety plan just for our team on site?
I do. You have to ensure that you develop one in a way that does not step on the toes of the larger event planners as well. It's best if you can try to coordinate one with them. And I guarantee you, if you were to walk up to anybody and say, hey, I've got an idea to help you save lives, equipment, and your company's reputation, let's enact an emergency action plan, I'm pretty sure they're going to say yes. If any of them respond with, no, we don't have time or whatever, I still think you should do it. You should absolutely use this tool to do so. This is going to be constantly being upgraded. I'm going to try to send more out. If I see any of you again, please let me know. Contact me via email and I'll send you updated versions of these. But one of the clever things that I wanted to cover, and one of the things that you were mentioning by being a smaller part of a bigger event, is these emergency response cards that you hand out to your staff. At the top, it should have the card holder's name. It should have underneath that the leader that they report to in case of an emergency. And there should be a leader who knows that I'm collecting 13 cards, and these are the names that are supposed to be on it. And if I don't have them, then I know that there's still somebody in that building that I need to go back and find. And even as a smaller group, you can have those cards ready and have a leadership plan so that there's an entire response plan for it. And on that card, it should have a kind of like a checklist for staff members to run. Okay, I found safety. It's now time for me to look at this. Okay, can I stop the threat? No. Can I help people evacuate? Yes. How do I do that? Okay, now I need to go to the rendezvous point. Where is that? Oh, I've got a map on the back of my card. I'm good to go. Like, you create a way to keep people safe, regardless of your authority within it. And honestly, I feel like even as attendees, you have no say or control over the event itself. You can still step up as a leader and say, I know of a good rendezvous point. I recognize that there are no backpacks that are left unattended. I know where the emergency exits are. All of that. So from the lowest level as an attendee all the way up to the event leader, I think that everybody should have an emergency action plan of varying degrees. Yeah, good question. Go ahead.
We actually do that on the back of the badges. So
Cool.
members or attendees have a certain emergency, or the standard on the back that's generic to them.
That's brilliant.
And the emergency person for us. But then on our staff, each person on the back of their badge has a different piece of information, just as you said.
Perfect.
That pertains to them in an action.
Perfect. Especially using something that they're going to have on their person, the law of Mike, if they're going to have it on their person all the time, yeah, that's the best thing to do. Yeah, so they don't have to dig out their wallet and find, oh, business card, yeah. But that's smart. Go ahead.
Something I've heard in the other emergency preparedness is that you want to be prepared to have Twitter and use Twitter, because even if the cell line's down, they're low level enough that you can still communicate, and that's an easy way. I don't use Twitter regularly, but you'd want to know what the handle is of the local law enforcement, fire, whatever, and be logged in at the time.
That's brilliant as well. The use of social media it's a double-edged sword in the sense that an event planner cannot rely on it, but absolutely use it as a tool. You can expect it to go down if and many people won't have their phone, they're going to drop it in panic, Wi-Fi is not going to be working, whatever. But once you get out to your rendezvous point, say, hey, I'm safe, what's going on inside the building, is it safe to go back in for our equipment, things like that. But yeah, social network, use it to put it in your emergency action plan.
We actually added it as a staple in ours, and there was a protest recently in St. Louis. We had a meeting going on in St. Louis where they announced the verdict of a police shooting. And there was demonstrations, and we had people in a hotel right in the center of where this whole protest demonstration was going. We had St. Louis police on Twitter, and it helped us through the entire night.
Yeah,
we just now added that to get the
first-hand experience of how valuable social media can be used. Ma'am in the pink, I think you had a question earlier, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're at a 3-day conference and you have the meals in the same room every day. Do you think it's something you repeat, the emergency exit at every meal? Or, we're going back to the same room, the same facility, and it's the same attendees? Are you going to say that?
Yes.
Every time before every meal?
It's an adamant yes. Because you want to keep it fresh in their minds, because in the moments of panic, it's very easily forgotten. Repeating it to the point where it makes them sick. I mean, every speaker in the same 3-hour block of speakers goes up and says, just a reminder, we got emergency exits. Okay, let me start my speech. Just saying something nice and quick just to keep it fresh in people's minds, something I absolutely advise. It doesn't need to take a huge chunk of your day because you're still trying to have an event, but yeah, good question.
And stairs as well, I know. It's huge.
Absolutely.
On the top floor.
Yep. Wheelchair ramps for the disabled, everything. Yep. You had a question in the back,
I
man?
was going to add to the social media that, yes, there are times like an earthquake that text messaging won't work, but if you're collecting cell phone numbers from your attendees, that is probably the way you're going to reach the most of them.
Absolutely. Yep. Got some good experience in the audience, guys. Well done. Any other questions? Cool. If you have any questions, if any of this doesn't sit well with you, please email me. We'll talk about it. I'm all about updating information, making sure everything is accurate and true so that people are safe. And if you want updates to this, because I will be working on it for the rest of my career, please let me know and I'll be happy to send them out to you. Thank you.